Thanks for joining us this afternoon, everybody. This is the Aspen City Council work session for April 1st. No joke, we are working right now. And on our agenda this evening, we have got Aspen Gets Us There transportation and parking study that the council asked to be commissioned and executed over the last couple months. And then we have an opportunity for council board and commission updates, as well as an opportunity for council member comments if we want. With that, we'll get right into our first agenda item. And Pete, I guess you're going to introduce this.
Thanks, Mayor Torrey. Thanks, Council, for your time tonight. This is really the first time that you're seeing the master parking and transportation plans. As you can imagine, this involves a lot of staff, and so the project team, the heavy liftings done by Sandy Dobler and Carly, who are part of the transportation department. Lynn Rumbaugh and myself, I'm the parking director. And then the parking side of things with a lot of data collection is Jeff Maltz, Blake Peterson, and Blake Fitch. So we started working on this fall, and I am running the show here so I can bounce. So this is in alignment with Council's #1 goal, or one of the top goals was transportation. And in order to do that purposefully, we wanted to create a holistic plan that incorporated both parking and transportation for the first time in a way that really took in public input, and that's been really a priority for this project. You know, we have discussions on the infrastructure side. This is really looking at the programmatic. Where can we squeeze all the improvements out of the parking and transportation programs that are already very high-level programs, and how do we improve upon those programs? And so our goal for you today is really, we want you to think of an overall vision of your plan. It's hard for us, a lot of us, we want to dive into solutions, but what we're asking for you is, we've gone through this process that Mallory will describe with the public, with a lot of the groups in the city. And what we've done is we did visioning exercises, got to a strategic point, and now we're just presenting ideas that have come through the community based on that feedback. And we kind of want to understand your vision on some of those pieces that we've pulled out into that plan, so that's understand your direction and where you'd like to see this vision go. Really, this is a critical point for you because we're right in the strategy part, and we really need your feedback and how you really want the city to function in this realm for traffic demand management, which will be referred to as TDMs for the next 10 years. And with that is really the goal we're asking for you today. I keep forgetting that I'm running this. And so we did pull out some of these topics, and what we're asking of you today is we're going to go through 3 of these in transportation of these heavy topics, and they're heavy topics, and then we're going to break, and then we're going to get your feedback after the transportation, and then we'll do the same thing. We'd ask that you hold your questions until we get to the feedback break, so it's really important that we look at this holistically, and I know that we're going to want to jump into the details, and we're just asking you to kind of stay right now, and then we'll go through this process and create an action plan based on the visioning of the community and you, and come back to council at a later date with all those details that you want. With that being said, I did not introduce Mallory Baker. She is our consultant from Walker Consultants today. She's been working with us since November when you approved this plan, and I think you're going to really like some of the things that she's brought back from the community.
Thanks, Pete. I have 2 mics, so I don't know where to direct my attention, but just right in the center, okay. Very nice to meet all of you, finally. This has been a long time coming. I know that these are topics of great interest for council and for the community, so really excited to share a little bit about our process and some of the strategies that we really want your critical direction on. And Pete's exactly right. I think when we were starting this plan, from the jump, everyone that we talked to wanted to get right into strategies and you know, the nitty gritty, the granular stuff. And we really pushed back on that because I think that's where we tend to have the most disagreement, right? Like everyone has the best idea and it's competing with this other best idea. But where we find a lot of common ground is the vision and what we want to achieve as a community. So getting a little bit into the process here. So we started in fall of 2023. Through the winter was really focused on data collection and analysis, and we'll talk a little bit about what that looked like. We also looked at example practices from 29 different communities that are facing different, you know, challenges, sustainability initiatives, similar goals and principles that the city of Aspen holds dear. And then from there, we developed a vision and guiding principles, and we heard from a lot of the community at that stage. We brought in the community, we brought in these different focus groups to really help us understand, like, what's the mountain we're trying to climb together? You know, we always want to jump right into tactics. What are we trying to do with these tactics? From there, and the stage that we're coming to you with now, we took that vision and we came up with, okay, here are some high-level strategies and ideas. And with the community, with our focus groups, we vetted those a bit. And it's at this point that we're asking for council input and review. And I think it's really critical that we get your feedback here because a lot of these ideas are sort of in tension with each other. You know, there's the tension of providing parking and really holding true to some of our transportation demand management and sustainability goals as a city. Some of these things are in conflict. So we have to think critically about where we go from here. And that's why we want council to kind of weigh in at this point, to really put your hands on this plan and put your voice into this plan so that when we come back to you, we'll have something that you feel confident rolling forward on. After we talk through this with you, we'll be getting into the nitty-gritty on action planning. So what do we need in terms of staffing to achieve this? What do we need in terms of technology procurement? When is this going to happen? What are the implementation priorities? And that will be the next session where we check in with you. Next slide. So we wanted to talk about the community collaboration aspect of this plan. I think this was a really community-driven process and kind of out of necessity because the scope of this project was incredibly broad, right? Parking and transportation, really the first time that the community has dealt with these two topics in tandem. As you might recall, you know, we've done a lot of transportation planning, like the short-range transportation plan, the short-range transit plan, which you might recall from 2017. That really focused on the transit side, the transportation side. This is the first time really that parking planning, kind of the philosophy around parking management was really brought into the fold, kind of two sides of the same coin. So we really wanted the community to kind of steer the ship on what that looked like, and it really required the community to dig deep and tell us, like, what aspects of the transportation and parking system do we really want to focus our energy on? There's so much we could do. Let's have you tell us where we want to focus our time. I think our results have been impressive. We've had the community weigh in at two different stages so far, and that conversation is still ongoing. We have focus groups this week focused on kind of consensus building, and your feedback is a critical part of that. So in the visioning stage, where we came up with what does success look like, what fears and concerns are coming out, and then at the strategy vetting process, so far we've had about 730 participants in our surveys on Aspen Community Voice through mapping and idea sharing activities, 170 plus participants in our small group focus groups, pop-up and open house. So we had transit center pop-ups, we had one open house, we have some other open house and pop-up opportunities tomorrow. And then we had these small group conversations with 11 community groups. So those groups included ACRA, Institute, Ski Co, bike shops, their representatives, their employees, their owners, CCLC, other lodging companies that aren't included in that CCLC group, emergency responders, private taxi and transportation providers, local employers, members of the former Next Gen Advisory Committee, and then EOTC staff. So this really involved a huge swath of the community. representing a lot of different perspectives and ideas. The principles kind of underlying that. So typically when we think about community engagement, we often come to them right from the jump with those strategies, with those ideas. That's where you get the most argument, right? Because everyone's idea is the best. And so people are usually only presented with, here's X choice and here's Y choice. We really eschewed that principle and really came to the community as a critical part of the data collection process. These are people who live and work and play in this community each and every day. So their perspective is truth, right? So we really saw that as a key framing of this process. I think when we get into the strategies, we're gonna wanna get into the detail and get into action steps right away. I think one of the things that we really owe to these community groups is honoring their feedback and their continued feedback. When I lead our community engagement strategy at Walker, and when I lead a community engagement meeting, I don't want to ask people questions that we don't want the answers to, right? So in order to honor the meetings that we're having this week, I want to make sure that we can carry that feedback through, which means we have to keep gathering and applying the feedback that we collect this week. So I think they're providing direction, you're providing direction, and we'll come to some hard conclusions after that. In terms of the process, just more quantitatively, we looked at a lot of data. The parking staff was really integral in collecting a ton of really granular data that hadn't really existed before this process. That the parking staff went out and collected like loading activity data, a ton of occupancy data, data on parking permit transactions and volumes that we took a look at. We also looked at granular ridership data across all modes, financial information, user experience, and survey data. We collaborated with providers and partners, all of the transportation providers that Aspen relies on, RAFTA, WeCycle, Downtowner. Experiential observations, so we parked in Aspen, we drove in Aspen, we took the bus in Aspen, we took Downtowner, we rode bikes. And we also looked at these example practices from other communities so we could kind of learn from their mistakes, get inspired, understand what parameters we have to work with. So getting to kind of like overall conclusions, I'd say one, this is a system that a lot of communities want to emulate, especially in a rural environment. You all know, this is not new news. The transportation system, the transit system is really looked at as exemplary. On the parking side, I think that's something that you all don't hear perhaps often enough, is that Aspen has really been an innovator over the years when it comes to parking. You know, having worked in the transportation industry for a long time, you all were, for example, really one of the first communities to tie parking management to TDM. That's not something that a lot of communities have done historically. Aspen was one of the first. One of the first to, or the first in the US to leverage smart multi-space meters. One of the first to digitize its parking system. There's a lot to be proud of here, and I think we can still build on that. Oh, I forgot to mention, one of the first to implement a form of demand-based pricing. So all very commendable. The interdependent components is a really critical piece, and that might seem quite simple and quite obvious, but I think one of the things that came up so frequently in our community conversations was when we were talking about what does success look like, well, it's not just more buses. Well, it's not just more Downtowner. It's not just more X or more Y. The community is really sensitive to and really understanding of, if you do something over here, something happens over here. You know, each of these components has a goal and has a role in the transportation and parking system. Getting into the challenges, Aspen, again, was one of the first communities to really commit to some of these staunch goals when it comes to TDM and sustainability. Incredibly commendable, and there's been so much work done there. Over the years, because of the way the community has sort of taken those goals and just sort of maximized out all offerings, there's been a little bit of a focus on kind of individual service level, you know, customer service at the individual level. So maybe sometimes too much of a focus on how does this one person experience our system, rather than a focus on, you know, holistic resource allocation. And then also, you know, a concept that more is always better. You know, everyone should have the same options everywhere. Right now, we have an opportunity to kind of look at how that's affected the system. I think it's worked for a while, but over time, we are seeing some significant demographic and behavioral shifts. I think you're seeing that. So one example is, RAFTA ridership has bounced back a bit from the pandemic. We are still seeing some reductions in ridership in our intracity bus routes. And really a lot of that, we think from the data, what story that is telling us is there have been some longstanding demographic shifts post-pandemic in Aspen that have affected how people are using our transit system compared to how, say, employees coming in on BRT are using the transit system. So they're kind of coming back to work behaviors, commute patterns that are similar to pre-pandemic. In the city, people are using the system in a little bit different ways. So we need to look at how is that affecting our system holistically, and what changes do we need to make to kind of realign and make sure we're still kind of marching in the direction that we want to march in. In terms of opportunities, overall, our opportunities focus kind of on 3 different things. One is goal clarity for every mode. One thing we're seeing is because we are a community that really prioritizes excellence and customer service above all else, and we have resources to spare on our transportation system or to spend on it, sometimes we lose sight of what is the purpose of these different components? What are they trying to do? So we want to talk a little bit about that. Secondly, we want to look at eliminating some of the rigidity we see in the system. So when you have a system that's impacted by demographic shifts and changes that are changing the way people are using the system on the parking side, on the transit side, if you have rigidity in the system, meaning things are codified, for example, or things have to go through a very lengthy political process each time they're changed, that means we can't be responsive and flexible in the ways that we might want to be. And finally, we have a substantial amount of resources, but we are looking at big things down the pipe, like, for example, fulsome electrification of bus fleets and things like that. Those will take money, those will take resources. So even though we have resources, we still want to make sure that we're sustainably allocating resources so that we can continue to be successful. So we'll first talk about transportation. A couple things we want to talk to you about. So this is just the categories of things, and then we're going to get into the detail. And we have some specific questions for you in each of these areas. First is about service standards and route review based on those service standards. Second is about car share expansion through a private operator. And third is about expansion of downtowner, which I know is a topic of great interest to this council. So we'll move through these, and then we'll talk a little bit about the questions after. So getting into service standards. So something we heard from the community, it was really interesting because we kind of asked them about, specific routes, about, what specific changes they wanted to make in the transportation system. One thing that really kept coming up was we just want kind of an objective understanding, a transparency in how decisions are made with, why are you sending buses over here? I think that they're empty. Why are you sending buses over here? Not sending enough buses over here when there's crowding or other issues. So the community is really asking for, clarity and transparency in how route decisions are made. The other thing that we want to respond to with these service standards is, again, that lack of rigidity, that ability to respond proactively when we see these changing transportation behaviors and patterns. So a couple ways we could tackle this. One is service standards. So service standards are really quantitative commitments to customer service and route productivity. And they're not like a line in the sand, but they are some metrics that staff and the community can sort of level set on to make sure there's a clear understanding of what a route is supposed to accomplish in terms of like passengers per hour, crowding, on-time performance, things like that. That gets complicated, and we'll walk through what that looks like in a minute, an example. Lots of transit agencies use service standards in a couple ways. So some examples of transit agencies that use service standards: Fort Collins, High Valley Transit in Park City, TART in Tahoe. They have service standards, and they also have a way that they apply the service standards. So they have these quantitative metrics, and then they have a process by which they can review and adjust routes if those standards aren't being met. So I want to walk through kind of a process, an example of what that might look like. So these up here on the left are examples of service standards. So this is Transfort's. We're just going to keep on Transfort's example. Transfort looked at, different routes, acknowledging that not all routes are the same, and they came up with a few service standards. One example that we have up on the slide is the number of passengers per hour that they want to move. They have a marking of unsatisfactory at this sub 15, metric. That doesn't mean that Aspen would adopt that standard. That's just Transfort's. I'm just using this as an example. Another example of a service standard they have is this seating capacity. So this is like crowding. This is like when you're waiting for a bus, let's say the Hunter Creek bus, and the bus comes and it's standing room only for a significant amount of passengers. That might be, cutting up against a vehicle load or a crowding standard. So Transfort sets these standards. If we went this route, if we went with the service standards approach, this is where council would help us come up with these service standards. So staff might come with a recommendation, and that's probably where we would come to you next time with some recommendations about what these would look like. And council would kind of sign off on, yes, we agree with these, and we think these are reasonable. Then where council would also come in is the process through which those are applied. So, for example, let's say a route is performing at unsatisfactory levels for a short period of time. Council would help us determine a process through which we could review that route, the tactics we could take, how long a route could be performing at unsatisfactory levels before we took a look at it, and what we did to kind of address that. So could we look at increasing marketing? Could we look at expanding first last mile connections? Could we maybe look at if we had really low passengers per hour for a long period of time, could we look at using on demand or combining the route with another route, things like that. So that's where council would weigh in on the standards and then what the process looks like. Where staff would come in is the ability to apply those standards to make data-based decisions. So when we get into this question, we're going to ask you, how comfortable are you with this process? And this might seem quite obvious, like of course we should be doing this. But there has been a lot of discomfort over the years in, changing or adjusting any routes, again, because of that focus on individual service level. If this person, isn't served by this change, then we can't do it. And that's a hard decision because, you're elected officials and this is a body where you're serving the community. And when you make decisions like that, there are people who will be frustrated by those decisions. But on the other side of the coin, when we don't have objectivity and transparency in how we make those decisions, we can get into those hard conversations repeatedly where it's really hard to make those objective decisions because then you're just making it based on, how many emails did I get on this topic or this other anecdotal information. So this would enable council and staff to have more assurance, more objectivity, more transparency in how those decisions were made. So this is just one example, and I want to take a little bit of time on this just because I think it's important. This is Transfort's process. So Transfort actually, they have the service standards, and then if they make a major change, like if there's a 25% of reduction in service, for example, then they go to a public hearing. That's written in their bylaws, so you have that extra assurance. If they make a minor change, like changing a service hour or something, then the service standards would guide that. It would be simpler. So this is an example here. In their service analysis, let's say that Transfort identifies a residential route that's performing at an unsatisfactory level on average for a whole year. What they would do then is they just mark it for additional evaluation. So they would say, this route is something that we want to monitor. I'm sure you can probably think of some routes where you might think, let's monitor this route. The route continues to perform at unsatisfactory levels for an additional 2 years. Okay, then they really know, we should do something here. That doesn't mean that they just eliminate the route. That doesn't mean that they, completely say, well, we've done our job, we're going to give up. Rather, they might reduce route frequency from every 15 to 30 minutes to better reflect demand. Maybe they increase route marketing. Maybe they expand some first last mile connections to help those people get to the bus stops. But then the route is still very low performing. So then at that point, staff at Transport would look at other measures to serve customers while just taking those buses that are just running empty at this point off the roadways and maybe sending them to other routes. Like maybe they combine the route with another that arrives and departs from a common terminal, or maybe they even look at on-demand service instead of fixed route. So that's an example of how this might work.
Question for you?
Yeah.
That was a pretty detailed example that you gave, but I have a feeling that it's not an exact situation. I was wondering if, and not right now, but if maybe you could give a actual real example from Transport. And I'd be interested in if there was any, first of all, I don't know how long has Transport been using service standards. How many times have they done any route changes? But I'd love to know if there are any examples, real examples, and if there was any follow-up input and feedback from the community that it serves.
That's a great question. So I work frequently with Fort Collins. I could ask them that and get you that information.
Be great.
And I think too, we can also share, so they're not the only transit agency that does this, but they're a good example because they have been using service standards for, I think, 15 to 20 years at this point. What I really like about their process is they don't just have the service standards, they have a really clear process for the level of change in correspondence with the community's ability to weigh in. So, like as you alluded to, kind of the community feedback point, they have a matrix that I can share with council that basically says if you reduce the route service by this percentage, then there's a public hearing process. So the community would have that, extra assurance that they would be able to weigh in. That also helps with things like, not Aspen comes up through RAFTA's Title VI analysis, which is the equity analysis. If you get federal funding, you have to come up through the civil rights non-discrimination laws. But Transport, when they eliminate route, if they eliminate or change a route, they have to add that assurance, show that they're not in non-compliance with Title VI. So this could help with that too. Let's say Aspen, at some point well in the future had to do its own Title VI equity analysis. A clear process like this would really help and has helped other transit agencies. So, Tori, I will get you that information, and at the next session, we'll even have some examples that maybe how this would be applied here, so you all can understand, how does this happen in the real world? Because I know a hypothetical is kind of difficult.
Yeah, and my interest is really just in how it played out in their process. Bless you.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, let's talk about car share. Your car share program is incredibly popular. So I'll just say that members of this car share program are incredibly happy. They love this service. It is the only, so as far as we were able to find, it is the only municipally run car share program in the United States. And that isn't necessarily something to be like, yay, we did it. It's more of, there's a reason why municipalities kind of give up this responsibility. And really it's because if you want to scale, it's really hard to do this we basically have one staff member who's dedicated to car share. And I would say this isn't just a staff problem. I'm not saying we need more staff or staff is too busy and that's the problem. It's more that there's a lot of kind of liability and sort of redundancy in duties that happens when you have a municipal staff member running this program. You have to do, customer service, review and approve new members, insurance validation, fleet procurement, fleet management, finding places for the cars, dealing with kind of the emergency issues that come up, like, a car share member gave the car keys to someone else and we don't know where the car is. You can imagine the things that kind of come up. So, oh yes.
You were just using the term "we," or were you talking about the city of Aspen?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Thanks.
Yeah, apologies.
So are you saying that those are current conditions for our car share program? And I was gonna ask anyway, our car share program, a couple years ago, I think we actually had to shut off the ability for new members to join. I think that has lifted, or I don't know if it's been put back in place. I don't know if we have constraints, but I agree with your first statement, which is it's very popular. You know, this council and other councils look at housing development opportunities, and we have several affordable housing complexes around that have a high density of users, perhaps. So when you were just saying that we have, basically you were saying this is a pain in the butt program, and there's a reason that more municipalities don't do it because it's got so many issues. Do we have those current issues, and can we move past them? I mean, I'm reading this blue box that you have. It says to partner with the private sector. So are we at a place where we can't expand our City of Aspen car share program?
I would say, so, and I'll let Pete and Lynn chime in if they'd like to. And apologies, I use the term like collective, like we a lot, because I just, you know, I like these guys and I've been working with them for a while, but I do not mean to, you know, infer
No, that's
that I'm
how I
working
took
with
it.
the
It was
city
a
of
positive.
Aspen,
I was like, I think
and
we're talking about the same.
We're on
I think
the
we're
same
talking about
team.
us.
We're on the
Yes,
same team, yes.
I get it.
So I would say you are at a point where it would be difficult with the current staffing to increase membership, especially if we're talking about, we did see in our survey data a lot of interest in this program, and we think it has legs in terms of, you know, helping people in affordable housing complexes, your second and third homeowners who live here come here and live a zero car lifestyle in Aspen. So it has a lot of potential. Where I would say we could leverage private sector and where like Vail and Denver are leveraging the private sector is in just the operational components of the program. Where we'd recommend retaining it is on the goals. So like you would still have a staff member or a staff team setting the goals for the car share program. Like, we want this car share program to help people to have a demonstrable effect in vehicle ownership, or increase percentage increase every year in zero car households among members, for example. And then you could leverage the private sector partner to just operate it, run the fleet, do the membership sign up. And then really interestingly with Denver, for example, they have a longstanding car share program. What they do is a little bit different from we'd recommend, just because they have a lot of vendors who want to come into that market, right? It's like, you know, a major metro area. It's much lower barrier to entry there than in Aspen. Obviously, you guys understand that. But what they do is they have this qualification program where the vendors apply, and then the vendors have to share all their raw data with Denver, and they have to conduct a survey of their membership each year that demonstrates that they're meeting the KPIs that the city set. So that's what we mean by, we want to expand this program, but we don't want to just give it away to a private sector operator to do whatever. We want to still retain control over, let's say, the location of the car share company, like parking spots and the goals and things like that. Does that help?
Yes.
Yeah, just, it's not that it's a pain on staff, but you're taking 2/5 of the staff of transportation at times, and we are kind of at a plateau, but if you are allowed to do a private, you can really grow it into like what you're talking about outside. And so those growth opportunities and the things that we've heard, the feedback is very positive that we've heard. So this is a solution that could direct us into making those improvements.
Thank you.
Well, I'd be interested in the financial end of private sector versus municipal. If we did more of our functions with a private sector, how much is that a cost proportionally?
Yeah, to the members. To the members or to the city,
Well,
or both?
the cost to the city and to the members, as it extends to the members as well. I mean, the members are going to be, unless it's highly subsidized, it's going to be a function of how much it costs to administer it.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll look into those details. I think with a private sector partner, especially, we would we would probably recommend going through an RFP process to have control over the private sector partner. Frankly, there probably aren't a ton of vendors who would be willing to come up here. Not because it's not a wonderful place, it's more just they gotta get their bag, you know. But in terms of the financial commitment, you could structure the RFP in such a way where the financial commitment on your end was defined. For example, the city of Denver, their only financial offering to the vendors is just, here you can have these parking spaces, which is frankly a significant financial hit because they're losing revenue. Other communities, like for example, Knoxville, Tennessee, they subsidize some of the membership rates. It's a little stratified, so they subsidize more they have some income qualification as well. And then they also do a revenue share with the car share. So there are different ways that we could structure that, and we could look at different options for council to review.
Yeah, I'd be interested if, for example, the downtowner or high mountain taxi might have capacity and an interest in doing that.
That's very interesting. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, and expanding their operations into car share management?
Yeah, instead of trying to find somebody from outside the community, if people that are already in the community would have the desire to and the expertise, and if it might be of interest to them.
Very interesting. Sam, can I just ask you, are you supportive of the car share program, and are you in a general policy level looking to expand it or at least enhance it?
Yes.
Yes. John, same question to you. Thanks. Okay, just want to give you clarity for that as we move forward, because I think this is an area that we are hopeful that might be a good impact for our community residents and
Yeah,
visitors.
absolutely. Thanks for asking
Thanks.
that clarifying question.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, so this is a great topic of interest, I think, for the community and for council. I think one of the way that we'll discuss this today is probably a little higher level than you guys want to be, and I'm just going to be honest about that. Here's why. So Downtowner is really popular. A lot of people want Downtowner. So when we talk to the community, Downtowner is, a program that's going really well and is enormously popular among focus group participants, among community participants, everyone we spoke with. I think council is well aware of that. Who doesn't want, on-demand, point-to-point transportation that's fare-free? Excellent. By the way, this was my transit folks that worked on this, and every community that I talked to pretty much was really impressed with the service levels and the fact that you guys have this program, and I think it's really a success. So we know that we want to expand or look to ways to expand Downtowner. One of the challenges is the community has told us throughout the process, we want more objectivity, we want more transparency, we want to understand why decisions are being made the way they are, and we don't want to just send more, because there's a concern about, same with the empty buses circling some routes. There's a concern about, noise, sending traffic into communities, adding to single occupancy vehicle usage in some cases. So there is another side of that coin that we have to balance. And we, of course, don't want Downtowner to cannibalize fixed route transit. The best opportunities, and I think council understands this, I was listening to the last time Downtowner was discussed in council, and I think council really brought this point home. On-demand is really a great tool to support and augment the amazing transit system that we have in Aspen. So we want to find ways to expand Downtowner in a way that maximizes our impact, all the goals that we have as a community. So a couple opportunities to do that. One is, we know that Downtowner, when it was originally created, was intended to reduce parking demand in the core. It was kind of like a carrot to a stick, right? As we dialed up parking rates, we could add this other opportunity, this option for people close in to the core to get to core services, to downtown in different ways. Now that we're expanding Downtowner, that means that we might need to look at other goals and rationale for Downtowner's existence and expansion. One of the really critical opportunities we see Downtowner supporting and serving is really as a first last mile connection to transit, especially in parts of the city that don't have proximal access to great fixed route transit. For example, and proximal access in this city, I mean like a quarter mile or more. That's what I'm talking about. So some neighborhoods in the city kind of fit that bill, where they might want some kind of first last mile connection to transit that could help them become, you know, more frequent transit riders and enhance their access to core services and to regional connections like the transit center. So setting that goal and setting a KPIs around that goal that the vendor could then report back to us on, like with car share, what we just talked about. For example, a KPI, if we do have this first last mile connection, would be among downtowner users, they use transit more frequently year over year, or they perceive their access to core services and destinations at a higher qualitative level year over year, just as an example. So with those understandings, we could then kind of create a map where we say, okay, these are the neighborhoods that based on those goals, we know that we could, we know meet those goals, right? We would also, of course, want to talk to downtowner to make sure that we could meet acceptable service standards. Like, for example, one of the challenges with, let's say, expanding downtowner everywhere, you know, past the roundabout, let's say, the service times would probably go down. Like the wait times would probably increase. So we want to make sure that, one, these neighborhoods could meet those KPIs, those goals, and two, we wouldn't be looking at service wait times over 20 minutes, which is kind of our max right now. We still understand that community participation is a critical aspect of this. So we want to give the community, once we talk about those quantitative benchmarks, the ability to tell us, do they want this service? There are some neighborhoods where maybe they wouldn't want it, and some that would. So we could have an element of community participation to say, okay, we know we qualify, we would like the service. Here are our, here's an example of like how much demand could be in this neighborhood if we did expand here. So as an example, you know, Boulder, Colorado, they don't have downtowner, but they do have these neighborhood eco passes. And first, staff look at, you know, do these neighborhoods meet these quantitative benchmarks and the goals that we've set for this program? And then the community, the people who live in those communities, have the ability to sort of say, yes, we want this. And then Boulder then takes the jump and sends the passes out. One final thing on downtowner before we move off downtowner. The last thing we wanted to talk about was hubbing pickup and drop-off points in the core. In core areas where we, especially if we're increasing the volume of downtowner service, we get concerned about, you know, on Restaurant Row or near the gondola, lots of concentration of drop-offs and then turnarounds, and especially on some of those one-way streets. So we might want to look at something like, if you used Uber a few years ago, this is more common, where you got a new Uber ride and it said, you know, walk a block and pick up, your pickup will be there. So this would just be a little bit more hubbing to reduce like true point-to-point pickup in the core. You would still get dropped off at your home or at your business in a neighborhood where things are less congested, but this would reduce some of that like immediate core congestion where we have those really tight streets.
I guess I'm going to call on Pete on this. I often thought that hubbing, to have a downtowner hanging out here at the parking structure, to be able to encourage people to park here and get to downtown without having to walk a few blocks. And if there's enough of demand for that from the parking structure into town to make that worthwhile.
I mean, yeah, that'd be a good hub. I think, you know, first, like Mallory said in the beginning, we'd have to look at the metrics of the Galena Street shuttle. But I think when you're looking at a holistic system, those are the type of places that we're looking at as far as a hub. And, you know, if you're interested in that idea, we'll come back with the locations that seem to make sense. But again, you know, like she discussed at the beginning, you don't want necessarily redundant loops unless you have that demand. And that's what we're trying to really fix here.
Yeah, and part and parcel to that is are there periods of time when the parking structure is just so full that there wouldn't be a demand, there's not enough turnover? I know it gets full in the summer, oftentimes, but just curious, you know, the demand for it. That's getting down into the weeds more than.
I think you're interested in the idea of the hub is what we need, and I think you're getting into the details that I can, you know me, I can sit here and talk for 3 hours about the garage and the dynamic there, but I think if you're interested in the idea, we'll come back with those locations and why those locations seem to make sense. Does that help?
Yeah.
John?
I just had a quick comment about the hubbing and wanted to add a comment about another area where Aspen was ahead of its time. When I first moved here and hitchhiking was a much more common form of transportation, there were signs over in front of the Cortina Lodge that said thumbing station, and it had a hand with a thumb and said
remember
thumbing
that.
station, and that's
Your
where
original
everybody went.
mobility hub.
It was organized. That's how
love
people
it.
got out of town.
I used to talk all the time about how I would end up hitchhiking more because I would get picked, if I was even at a bus stop or something, just that would get you picked up before the next bus would even come by. But the thumbing stations were a sure hit.
It's a real thing.
All right, we're marking you down for bringing back the thumbing stations.
No, we'll need legal, we'll need legal to chime in on that for
Okay,
us.
just,
I think that car
sorry,
was
Attorney Schumer.
Not quite. Jim's already shaking his head over there.
I'm joking. Okay, so getting to the questions, so I went through these really quickly and didn't get into the questions, and I think we've answered some of these. I think on car share, we're feeling good about that. I think where we want to really get your sort of buy-in, so two areas. One is service standards. So we are honestly asking for a little bit of kind of granular control relinquishment on behalf of council. I'll be honest here, because what is happening now in our process is if we want to change a route, a city route, right? That would be a process where we came to council and we said, you know, here's the data and here's the route. And then it would probably be, you know, it's frustrating for council particularly, because then that's when we get into the anecdotal and the emotional, right? Because then when we talk about those individual routes, frankly, when you make changes to routes, you do affect people. Those are hard decisions. So what we want to ask for is a little bit more of a transparent process that would be based on those quantitative standards. And some of them could be qualitative. But then staff would kind of apply that process. And I think, Tori, you brought up a good point about seeing how that process kind of manifests, like with Transport as an example, how the community has had a chance to weigh in that public hearing process, and we could bring that at the next time. But just philosophically, how are you guys feeling about that? Because that's different from how we're doing things now. Yeah.
So I had a couple questions, and then we'll open it up for some input. You know, varying routes have varying populations that are served. They have different density, and so they have different conditions. So when we talk about setting up service standards, I would want to be sure that they are, the service standards are applicable to the individual routes, neighborhoods that are served, et cetera. It would not be one service standard that I think oversaw all those routes. Along those lines, and again, this is not necessarily for right now or this meeting, but I was going to ask you from your experience and such, you know, I find that Aspen is unique in its layout. And so it's also unique in some of its population, affordable housing and density versus oftentimes empty second homes and the like. And so I was going to ask for maybe some color commentary from you around other places that you've worked with and such, around some of those challenges and opportunities that we have here. You know, I'm thinking about the fact that Aspen is a very small downtown core, but then we have neighborhoods out that way, and further. So not necessarily right now, but those are always kind of things that I think of when we talk about transit is how who we're moving and how we're moving them.
Yeah.
And Aspen has its own set of challenges with kind of our layout and our demographics and stuff. So maybe some on that later, but I'll give you, I'm going to let others talk to this particular question before I do to hear their untainted input.
Yeah.
And I'm going to start with Sam.
Thank you.
It was a head fake.
No look past.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, well, I'm going to answer the bottom one first. Exploring new neighborhoods, I think, is definitely a great idea. The Williams Ranch neighborhood is one that I've earmarked, thinking that that's far enough away from a bus stop that would make a lot of sense, but isn't.
It's hilly too up there.
It is, yeah, to get from a bus stop up there. As far as everything else goes, I would be open to setting service standards through staff, as long as it did come back to us and was open to the community to have input before anything was changed drastically.
Yeah, and drastically, would you be willing to say, set a parameter that would constitute a major change that would require a public hearing? Like, for example, with transport, they say if it's a 25% change or more in service, then there's a public hearing. For minor changes, if we do go back to like a public hearing each time, that's not very much different from what we're doing now. So just want to get your clarity on that.
Well, I guess in my mind, the 15 to 30-minute change on the bus route, does that qualify? Because that would be a major inconvenience for someone who is expecting every 15 minutes.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm not, if that's something that would constitute a major change to you, we'll come back to you with some ideas of what that process would look like, for sure.
Yeah, frequency I think does matter, especially since people rely on the bus.
Absolutely, yeah,
Frequent enough.
yeah. Convenience is really important, so.
Perfect. And then, yeah, expanding car share offerings. I definitely would be open to that as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ward?
Yeah, I think it's a balance between, I mean, it can be a lot more nimble if staff and the administration can make changes. It can be a lot quicker. If it goes through the government, I've said this many times, the older I get, the faster time accelerates. But then I got involved in government and time stands still. So it just takes forever to get something done if you're scheduling work sessions, you're scheduling, by the time we can react as a political body, conditions have changed. So for me, it's a balancing act between micromanaging from the council table and public feedback and public input. Yeah. I think that I would, in balance, I'd rather see it handled administratively. I don't know what I mean, there are lies, damn lies, and statistics. If you increase by or decrease by 1, that's 25% if there are only 4 people. So what the actual numbers are, at what point do we go through public hearings? I don't have an answer for that. I'm not sure. I'd like to see more comparisons to, is it Boulder or Fort Collins or?
That was Fort Collins, but we can also bring like High Valley and Tahoe and other resort communities into the mix because they actually approach similar challenges and opportunities to what Tori was bringing up,
Yeah,
to
and
Park City specifically.
I think in the packet, there's a mention, you get a few people that are vocal, that can sway public opinion at a council table. So I would rather have the administrative staff be able to handle this because of the ability to react in a timely fashion.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Do you want to go ahead and input on the other 2 bullet points here?
Yeah, I think without having service standards and review, you can't really react to the other one about changing things. Expansion at Downtowner, I'm willing to look at expansion of Downtowner, but I'm also cognizant of how that would impact local businesses that are in the transportation business. If if by expanding service, we're taking away business from, say, High Mountain Taxi, how often they have calls for that kind of expanded service. If, in Sam's example, Williams Woods or Williams Ranch, Williams Ranch.
Williams Ranch and Silverload.
Yeah, if your High Mountain Taxi isn't getting any calls there, if they're not losing any business and there's a demand for it there, I'm all for it. But just as we did with WeCycle, limiting the time for free bicycle service, how that affects bicycle rentals, whereas that first half hour is free, and then it gets to be pretty expensive to keep a WeCycle out for more than the first half hour. And that, I think, was more in response to protecting our local bike shops that are renting bicycles. So it's hard enough to survive in business in this town. And by offering more downtown, I want to balance that against how it might affect private sector transportation.
Yeah, those are good thoughts. I think the WeCycle comparison is really apt. WeCycle has been able to expand, but I think there's a lot of clarity of the use cases, as you say, between WeCycle rides and it's first last mile connection, quicker trip, first 30 minutes free versus a bike shop rental, which would be, full day, multi-day, things like that. So, yeah, good points. John?
Okay, I do support the standards review process. I agree with Ward. It'd be easier to administer that through staff than through council. Car share expansion, I would support that, but I would also support staff's recommendation to have it private, or if the city should continue to run it. And my last, with the downtowner expansion, my feeling is the downtowner should basically just fill in the gaps of where our bus system is already operating. I'm also aware that the downtowner, for 50% of the time it's on the road, it only has one person in it. Those are just some thoughts I have, but whatever we can do to get more people out of their cars, I support.
Great.
Thanks.
That's really helpful. Thank you. All right, we have a lot to talk about on the parking side, so.
Let me chime in on transportation.
Oh, yes,
before
I'm
you
so,
go.
I'm sorry, Tori.
That's okay. I'm just checking my email to see if our fifth member of this board was able to get his email back to me with any input.
Oh, great.
Not seeing it. He's traveling today and had some difficulty, so.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think he was able to. So my input here is I'm not necessarily for a service standards and route review process that puts administrative change to routes and service into staff's purview. That's fully just to protect staff. These are hot and heated items, and as elected officials, we are accountable to our voters and to our constituents. And I could see that if any changes were made to routes, that staff would be under a tremendous amount of heat for that if it was not here to come to city council table. So I do not support a service standard route review process that leads to that. I've been at this table off and on over the last 20-something years, and I've been shared many times. It's passenger mile breakdowns through different service areas that we have, and that includes the cost of them as well, and the like. I'm very much just looking for coverage. My earlier kind of question to you about kind of the nature of how Aspen is laid out and what our service is available, where I think is dictated by kind of our topography as well as our demographics. So I'm just looking for coverage, and I think for me, when I talk about this as an issue, I love to see a map. I love to talk about where things are going and what their coverage is. and the like. So on number one, no, I'm not so in favor of that. That's why I was kind of looking for input from our fifth member, because direction on this is a little bit split or murky. We'll come back to that if we need to. I'm not opposed to some of that work going forward to give council members a better view of what that really means. But I think that I've seen some of that over the years, and it's not something that is necessarily intriguing to me, but always willing to learn more. Car share expansion, as I said earlier, yes, I also don't know if that's best through a private operator or maintaining the same conditions. I love the local opportunity that may come through this. I also wonder about partnerships with HOAs. I wonder about partnerships with RAFTA and the like. So I am for expanding the car share opportunities in Aspen. I think that a lot of residents are as well. And hopefully, if any of this gets out through the local media, maybe some people will be encouraged to apply, to go online and to get their car share membership. And downtowner expansion process, yes.
Sorry for that typo, that was
That's
on me.
quite all right. I am for expanding the downtowner, but as I said, I am most interested in it in both the areas of covering the gaps where our fixed route service doesn't hit, as well as connecting it to first last mile as a resource there and getting it to mass transit as a priority. But as I said in our last meeting, I'm less concerned about just downtowner area expansion as I am interested in even upping the program. I'll give you an example. You know, right now we contract for that service with an outside entity that doesn't afford us some of the opportunities. For example, for the opportunity for drivers to own the cars that they drive, for the city of Aspen perhaps to own the cars that are utilized, for us to create a local app that ties in with the rest of our transit and serves the downtowner as well. So I really think that the downtowner is fantastic. I think it serves a lot of people. I think it could do even more. I'd be interested in putting more vehicles on the road at one time. So I'm kind of in the camp of, I see a lot of opportunity for the downtowner expansion.
Can I ask maybe two follow-up questions? One is more to kind of clarify direction on service standards, given that Bill hasn't been able to give his input yet. And hopefully we'll be able to circle up with him later in the meeting. It sounds like so with the transport example, I think that's pertinent to what you were talking about, Tori, with kind of the differentiation between the route typologies and the different demographics that our different routes serve. We don't have a kind of one-size-fits-all approach, it sounds like, wouldn't behoove Aspen, and I think that that's fair. The way that Transport dealt with that was interesting, and I think we could maybe play with that. They had a route categorization, essentially, if you remember from that example on the screen. And then they used that to say, you know, rather than just say all routes, and they actually have, I think, 6 different categories. It's a much bigger system, but just for the sake of, you know, argumentation, hypothetical. They have these different route categories, and then they have different levels for each. And these are kind of similar, the ones on the screen, but the ones that they have in addition to these are quite different. So maybe we could look at, rather than a one-size-fits-all approach, some differentiation in those standards. And then the other thing, so that's sort of point one, is would you have more comfort if we had more kind of demographic, route, sort of quality or type-based classification within the service standard? And then my second question is, if staff were just able to use this to kind of review, and now this is sort of a tool, if we had a process wherein the community would have say at certain junctures, as Sam posed, like for example, if headway frequency was changed at X or Y level, would you have more comfort with it in those cases? And it's okay if that doesn't give you more comfort, but I'm just wondering if those two things might be good for us to bring to you in our next conversation.
If there is council support for this becoming a process that we utilize, then I would say yes to your first question about identifying different route types. Yep. And because I think that I come from a coverage perspective, like I said earlier, the public input at that level is, well, it's always welcome, but I'm afraid that if decisions are getting to that level, that based on service standards, that we may be missing the mark in coverage.
Okay.
So yeah. And two things I'll say. One is I believe that our local transit, so our free routes in Aspen, have seen a reduced ridership of 30% since the pandemic. Over 30%. It's come back to only 30%, to be quite honest. It was down, obviously, during pandemic. It was decimated pretty much. But as we got back to ridership, we still, here at the upper end of this valley, are still sitting 30% below where we were pre-pandemic levels. Mm-hmm. So something is going on. And so with our reduced ridership levels that we're experiencing, I'm concerned that service standards leave out things that might fall below our service standard might still be serving a population that needs service. And so that's my hesitancy around this and saying, and so even having the public hearing process. I mean, yes, obviously I would love for the public to have input, but public input versus data from our staff and stuff, again, that puts staff in a very difficult position unless it comes to council. In the example you're giving, it would come to council, I guess, with public hearings, but I just don't. I don't know. I don't know if that is the right fit for the size system that we have and the population that we serve. Yeah. And part of the reason I say is because we're still 30% below our pre-pandemic ridership levels. So anyway, yeah. Pete, you want to jump in on something there?
Go ahead, Pete.
This is a complicated topic. So it's not about, if we can come back, like if you give us permission to come back and talk about this more, I think it would help. I think from a high level.
You have that permission.
Thank you.
Yes.
We'll come back. One thing to keep in mind, you're coverage-based. We're not saying that we're going to reduce coverage necessarily. It just may have a different look in the way that we can move people around the city. So rather than the old style, we'll come back with like what that
I know,
looks
but
like. Okay.
even as recently, we had public comment that was talking about fixed route service versus on-demand service. Mm-hmm. And what that means to them. There's a very specific neighborhood, our West End neighborhood over here, which traditionally had very few residents, and we're seeing a little bit more residency since pandemic, and our friends have moved to Aspen, Colorado. So anyway, I get it. You have enough support that there is interest in finding out more about service standards in action. So yes, bring it back. I'm just telling you that for me, it's probably not for me, but I'm one of 5, so.
I think all your points are very fair. I think we're gonna work to address those in the next period. And of course, I mean, there's no right and wrong way to do things. It's just how a community can use its resources most effectively. And I think one thing that I'll say, and we're gonna get to this on the parking side too, because I think this affects the parking a lot too. Where I think staff does get cover, and where frankly I think city council gets cover, is if you have something to point to say, yes, this decision was hard to make, but here's why it was made. I think on the parking side, as well as to some extent on the transportation side, because we, and I keep saying we, sorry, because the city of Aspen as a community, I'm not lucky enough to live here, I wish.
You're still a we.
Okay. I can
While
be
you're
part-
sitting there, you're
part
a
of the
we.
team. I think because we get very focused on customer service at the individual level, which is easy when you're in a small community, you see these people, at Clark's or grabbing coffee or whatever. So it's really hard to say, this decision affected you. But I think that does result in some lack of transparency around why those decisions were made. And so I think with service standards, you at least have something to point to say, this is why we're at least thinking about these decisions. So that's something to think about. And I think we have our work cut out for us to explore this more and come back to council with some more detail about how this would look. And I appreciate your thoughts very much.
Okay, before you get into parking, council members, does anybody need a moment? Ready to keep going? Cool.
Awesome. Okay, parking. So we have a couple topics we want to touch on today. Parking inventory and safety, parking permits, and then parking pricing. So we have some specific questions. We'll talk about those at the end, maybe when we dig through some of these topics. So this is a hard one because when we talk to all of these focus groups and community members, and like I've said, ACRA was a huge part of this, CCLC, the core of the business community in your downtown. Safety is of critical importance to everyone we've talked to. No one said, oh, safety doesn't matter to me, and I don't care if people have vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to pedestrian, vehicle to cyclist conflicts. I don't care. No, everyone was staunchly committed to that. I will say that where we had some difficult conversations was the importance and sort of like sacrosanct nature of your core parking inventory, because it's tight. A lot of vehicles are coming into our core each and every day. I think 9,000 per day is like the minimum, 18,000 plus during peak season per day, trying to fit into these small spaces. The core is incredibly tight. For the business community, that core parking inventory is really essential to how their businesses function. They really want to hold tight to it. They're not asking for a massive, increase. They don't want to build a parking structure tomorrow, although we did hear that, just build a parking structure. We don't have that recommended as a strategy, but they do want to see where we can maintain and maximize this core inventory. As you all recall, Galena Street was one of the streets that was striped to parallel during Living Lab. What we have right now is a widened travel lane. That travel lane was intended to be apportioned in part to a bike lane or a wider sidewalk. Right now, it's a wide travel lane with parallel parking. So that can invite, some speeding, some negative anti-safety behaviors. If we return that striping back to angled, we'll increase the inventory on Galena, which is a very high demand street. On the other hand, we still want to address safety, right? And that was of critical importance to our focus groups. There are other ways to do that. It just means if we're not talking so much about parking configuration, meaning we're not just going to parallel everywhere, we can find other ways to do that through parking management. One of the opportunities that we see is in Aspen, in the core, where our streets are really tight, where every time people break the rules, it really has an impact. There's a lot of non-compliance. There is a lot of parking in bus lanes, parking in crosswalks, parking really close to sidewalks. We do have active enforcement, but our fines are not working for us in the way that they could. So this would be, leveraging some premiums specifically for safety-based violations, so parking in a crosswalk, parking in a bus lane, the bad stuff, and then focusing enforcement not on people who break a rule once, but on habitual violators using graduated fines. We have one example of graduated fines here in Aspen, and that's the core overtime. We would really want to also focus graduated fines on those safety violations that are really impeding others' ability to get around. I will say, the concern here is always, well, people who are wealthy, who come to our community as tourists, they'll just park wherever they want and they'll just pay the fine. I will say that the data shows that even in high wealth communities, this still results in a reductive incidence of noncompliance. So we have seen the data show that. Of course, Aspen is different from other communities. It could not work here, but we'd want to try. So this is a way that we could look at leveraging parking management as a way to help people get around the core, which is really tight, without, focusing on parking reconfigurations as a primary strategy.
I'm going to add one thing. Safety was a very high-level thing with people in this community. It's just how it looks. Staff is going to come back with Safe Streets for All to give you that opportunity to kind of talk about, again, what does the safety look like through the core? And Trish will come back for that discussion. What this is really looking at is like, right now we have an unsafe condition. For you to think about, can we maximize the change in the parking back until you have that discussion with Trish? And that's up to you all. And that's kind of a high level, but we'll keep going on and you can come back to it. I know there's some opinions.
Pete, can you pull any statistics on if they exist? Angle parking, it seems like the safety feature is people backing out of a parking spot and hitting a bicyclist.
We're going to get into details here, and I'd rather Trish take this, but it is
I'm not asking
absolutely
for an answer
safer.
now.
It is absolutely safer.
Save that for the next discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
So a second opportunity where we really see a really critical juncture to kind of weigh in and get this on a better track. So the city of Aspen has 9 different special parking permits, many different types. Some of these parking permits are sort of deviating from their original intention. I'll give an example of the business permit as one example. Originally intended as a loading opportunity for businesses in the core to then park for a short time, unload, and then go into the residential neighborhoods to park. That's, I think, $140 a year now. Right now, some businesses are, so with the number of permits versus the number of businesses, we know that many businesses have much more than one permit, and those have sort of become used as a de facto commuter permit. So some businesses have access to this de facto commuter permit that they can then give to employees. A similar thing is happening on the lodge permit side. So we were able to look into some significant data, permit rolls on the lodging side. And I will say, for the lodges, this is certainly important to them, and we want to find a way to maintain this permit. But it is being used as a de facto commuter permit as well for lodge employees, and that's kind of said by they've told us, and also it's clear from the data based on how much they take. And then we also have some permits that are maybe outdated. Just as an example, the EV permit is one that we really want to dig into. I'd say from an equity standpoint, on average currently EVs cost significantly more than standard ICE vehicles, gas-powered vehicles. Obviously we want to, incentivize zero emission choices, but this permit is a free permit. And if, let's say on the other side of the coin, if everyone got an EV, does that mean that everyone now has access to this free parking permit? So the challenge here is finding a way to provide parking permits where they're needed, but also find ways to consolidate the number of permits that we have, maybe get rid of outdated ones. Another one that's quite challenging is the carpool permit, which, you go to a kiosk, you collect a physical permit, and then you go and park in the system. There are ways to maybe use, for example, a subsidy on a rate on an existing permit, and that could be managed in a digitized fashion rather than having the separate hang tag permit. The other challenge that we're seeing here is that, you know, some permits are digital and work well with our system. They're easy to enforce. Some permits are paper, so they're very hard to enforce and frankly hard and confusing for the user. For example, a lodge employee was telling me that when some of their guests, you know, forget to put the paper tag on the dashboard, and then they get a ticket, and then the lodge has to comp the ticket, and it's a whole mess. So we really would like to consolidate and then digitize all permits. And then the third strategy, I think, really requires council's direction, which is, you know, managing parking permits is a challenge because, especially with some of the de-evolution of the ways in which these permits were originally intended versus how they're used. Right now, some people have access to, for example, of a commuter permit, and some businesses don't. And so there's confusion of like, well, why does he have it and I don't? I want to be able to offer this to my employees too. We could go on the other side of the spectrum and just say, okay, well, we'll just have a commuter permit, right? Well, that really gets us into induced demand territory, which results in, you know, traffic congestion, AADT increases, all the problems that we want to avoid, that this plan was intended to kind of obstruct. So in addition to that consolidation and digitization, we want to leverage this parking permit. Our recommendation is to look at this parking permit program as a TDM strategy and leverage, you know, pricing, maybe some capping of the number of permits we offer, and also just getting really clear on who qualifies for the permits and why, so we can manage this better, track it better, and again, like point to that objective direction on why these permits exist and what they're for and who they're for, rather than just going down the rabbit hole of just giving everyone a commuter permit, because I can tell you the demand for that commuter permit would be quite strong, and then your bus ridership would go down on the BRT and even more in inner city routes. Parking pricing. Okay, so this is again talking about how small our core is and how small our parking inventory is, which is good, a good thing. You know, we don't want to just build our way out of this problem. We want to manage our parking inventory. Right now, our parking pricing isn't really that effective of a parking management tool for a number of reasons. One, all of our pricing down to the dollar amount for hours, for the permit types in the garage, for example, the dollar amounts are in code. So if we want to change, if I even want to raise the price of hourly rates to $1 more, or by 50 cents or something, we have to go through an ordinance reading, okay? So a couple challenges with that. The value of the dollar changes constantly, right? So we don't want to necessarily have the dollar amounts in ordinance. What some communities are moving to is having in ordinance rather a range of rates, so a floor and a ceiling. So there's not like, you know, you can't go out tomorrow and say, I'm going to make parking $50 an hour or something. That wouldn't be the case. And then tie that to occupancy threshold. So the theory with parking is, in order to use pricing as an effective parking management tool, you want to set prices at a level that results in about an 85% occupancy level. If it goes above that, the rates are too low. If it goes below that, the rates are too high. So you could go down, you could go up. But in ordinance, you would just have the range and kind of the database parameters to make those adjustments. This is, again, us asking council to not weigh in on these kind of menial pricing changes. This would be a difference, a shift in how we're dealing with things now. This would give council the authority to help us write and approve the ordinance where it would have a range, you know, X dollar to Y dollar, and then occupancy levels where those prices would be changed in small increments to allow for staff to kind of make those decisions based on council's guidance on what those changes would look like. So this is a little bit of a shift again. And then the final, you know, ask here on the pricing as a parking management tool, we have some form of demand-based pricing already in Aspen. The hour differences in price on hourly rates in the core and the peak and off-peak season. We might look at some additional demand-based pricing through location-based pricing. So you have some streets in the core that are pretty low demand where we could use some lower pricing to encourage parking in those areas, and some areas like for example, Galena, Cooper, as you get closer to the mountain, those areas are really hot and heavy and could probably use some higher pricing to balance demand a little bit more than we're seeing now. But really the main ask here is the difference in how we're thinking about pricing in ordinance versus a range and a database decision-making process that council could approve and staff could then apply. Next slide, we'll get to the questions. So parking inventory and safety, I know that this is a difficult and challenging topic, and we certainly, like, I just want to emphasize how much the community really values safety. And I will say that the business community particularly is just invested in maintaining the core inventory. So I know that this is a challenging conversation, and that's why we're talking to council about it, because this is way above my, pay grade, right? And then the second question here is around the premium fines and graduated fines. Can we use those to reduce parking violations and enhance safety? Parking permits, this is really around, can we use parking permits as a way to implement TDM goals? Honestly, the action steps kind of flow from there. We've kind of gotten away from that, honestly. And I think, especially with some of the special privileges that some people in the community have and others don't, and the qualifications are a little misunderstood. So do you agree that parking permit offerings, pricing, and enforcement should be managed in support of TDM goals? That's our question on parking permits. We can talk about other topics, of course. And then parking pricing, would you support a process wherein staff and city council would set and staff would implement a data-driven process for adjusting parking rates to better manage demand in the core? And that would include both the Rio Grande parking plaza and the on-street meters in the core. I will turn it back to you, Tori.
Thanks. I'm going to start off with comments on this first one because I think it's very important. I appreciate the business community's input on this, and our job up here is to balance all sectors of our community for all the people that we represent. I do not think that we should be going back to angled parking on Galena Street. I think that is counter to several of our goals. One goal might be parking availability in the downtown core, but I think this goes against several others of our values, our goals, and truly the way this community and the direction this community is heading and should continue to head. So I want to start with comments on that. I know there's probably difference of opinion from some members of council, but as a 20-year resident, one block from this street, I can tell you that the existing conditions out there now are much better than they were when it was double angle parking on both sides of the street. And I see it and witness it and feel it on a daily basis. So I'll go ahead and I want to comment on that. I do not agree that we should return that to angle parking. I think that is really a bad idea. Premium fines and graduated fines being used as a measure to reduce parking violations and enhance safety. No, I'm not there with that. I already think that what we're doing for downtown ticketing needs some revamping. I think it's too high. I don't think that there's an opportunity for people to pay those fines immediately for a discounted rate. Let me share a quick story with you. I had some friends that were recently visiting Iceland. In Iceland, they were lucky enough to receive a speeding ticket. And the officer has a credit card machine on him, and if you pay it on the spot, you receive a 35% reduction in the fine fee. If we were to be able to do things like that, something that I've recommended for a long time was if somebody was to get a ticket and they could pay it that day or within 24 hours, they should get half off of it or something like that to get immediate response on tickets. I think that would be something that would get me closer to saying, yeah, raise fines. But at this time, no, I don't think that our fines should be raised. Parking permits. I do think that there is some information to go around here, but in this presentation and in my packet, I didn't really see some of that data that we've had before about how many permits of what type or where and such. You know, this again, as a downtown resident, this is something that impacts me. There are many times where I cannot find a residential parking spot for myself within blocks of where I live. And at the same time, I recognize those that are being utilized by employees and by hotel guests. So I do think that there is definitely a better balance that we can be striking with our parking permits. And parking pricing, once again, no, I don't think that this should be something that the staff is held accountable for. I think that this is something that the city council should be determining. And, again, as an elected official, as a representative, I try to make decisions for the best interest of the majority of my community, and these are the kind of decisions that impact everybody, so I think that that's probably something that needs to stay at a council table. I also wanted to say, I think we have done a great job. Kudos. I think you do. It is actually. We got through the living lab, which was not a successful project or process, but we got through that, and the lessons learned there, and some of the things that you've done and instituted, I think, have paid dividends for us. Again, as a downtown resident for 20 years, this is something that hits me in the face every single day. And being in the office of mayor over the last 5 years, these are the complaints that I get, right? So I've seen a reduction in complaints. I've seen an increase in downtown parking availability. The one thing, and I sent an email recently, I believe, Pete, you got an email from me that was asking about ADA and handicap parking accessibility. That's something that I strongly believe in, so I do want to see us maintaining those opportunities in our downtown core. I've long had an issue with the loading zone that is on Galena, this street that you're talking about. So I see that there's an opportunity to return some parking spots on that side of the street in this very location. So I think there are some other opportunities, but overall, I think that our staff has done a really great job over the last couple of years. And I think we're seeing a better balance than we've seen in a long time downtown. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Tori. I'd have to agree that your staff does a great job, so.
John.
Let's see, starting with the top bullet point. Returning Galena Street parking to angled, I am not for that. I think the reasons we changed it to its current configuration was to improve pedestrian and biking experiences downtown. Staff actually shared with us that backing out of parallel parking or angled parking was more dangerous. I also think it improves sight lines, which I think is a really important part of the downtown Aspen experience. I wasn't sure about the second bullet point under parking inventory, but I do agree with Tori that that's a gray area that I'm not sure about that. I would like to figure out a way to discourage people parking in inappropriate places, because I see that every day. Yeah. But I don't know the correct way to do that. Parking permits, let's please simplify that. We need to close some loopholes there. And parking pricing, that sounds pretty complex. I'd like to keep it simpler than that, but I'd like to learn more.
Okay, so interested in maybe us studying and bringing back more solutions and ways that would be manifested in the next conversation.
That'd be great, thanks.
Okay.
Down this end. Order Sam? Sam?
Thank you. I have some questions before I answer. One was, how many spots could we return to Galena if we did re-angle it?
It depends on the level, but between 35 and 56.
35 to 56 more parking spots.
Revamped, but you'd be sacrificing some safety pieces in doing that. depending on
And
the level.
does that include Cooper as well? I can't, honestly can't remember. It
Yeah.
does. Is there anywhere else in downtown that would have, where parking could be increased?
If your direction is to maximize the parking, we'd come back with another plan that looked at specifics on how you would maximize parking in the core.
But as of right now, like Galena and Cooper had parking taken away, it can be returned. There's no other spots where like angled parking could be put in that you know of at this time without going to study that, right?
There would be other locations probably where you could fit in some angled parking, but what you're asking for is a holistic look of how do you increase that downtown parking? And there would need to be a bigger discussion of what that means with safety and how you actually move vehicles around the core.
And as the parking department, have you heard many complaints or people clamoring for parking returning, angled parking returning?
I would say the feedback was very strongly in favor of returning.
From the business sector.
It was more than the businesses, but that's okay. I think you made it's a difficult conversation, as Mallory said. And we've had feedback from a lot of different people, and the living lab was hard for a lot of people, and I think you need to relook at what safety means and how that impact is.
Without studying, can you even speak on what safety would mean returning angled parking? Or are we just talking about like
Well, right now,
the obvious?
Trish is probably here, and I'd rather her, but we shouldn't get into the safety here. I'd rather wait for that if you're okay with that. I think what John said is exactly correct, that, that angled parking is less safe than parallel parking. And, it's whether you're moving people or vehicles. And so you have to look at it through that lens. Are you moving people easier, or are you making it more congested with these vehicles trying to get to the space? We've got a great system in Aspen, and there's been a lot of good things. And I think sometimes we forget how many of these programs are like really in place for a good, and now we got to this hard part of like safety, and what does that mean? Is there pieces of balance in between? And you got to think of it as how do you move people and, get that, if that helps you at all, did that,
No, I mean, it's a very difficult one for me. Another one I wanted to ask was, has it ever been explored to create more one-way streets in Aspen?
So that would be part of the discussion you'd have to create more angled parking.
Not just Galena, but yeah.
Trish and I, we've looked at every one-way scenario you could have in the city, I think probably multiple times. So we've looked at it, yes.
Has that ever been proposed to city council?
It's never been requested. We have had one-way discussions on certain streets and how each one's kind of come up systematically. I mean, we just, Mill Street, Galena, Hyman, and then it goes all the way to, how it would function during the project called Shift of like how it would look for a course. So, you'd have to, if that's a direction, we can start looking at how to move vehicles.
I would add that certain streets, the right-of-way is narrower, so that the only way to add angle parking on both sides, it would have to be a one-way street.
No, and that's what I'm wondering here.
Yeah.
Is there a room for compromise? Like, would it make sense for Aspen to have a bunch of one-way streets gridded downtown with increased parking because they're one-way and increased safety because it's one-way versus having to try to do it at Galena? Because
But I would ask you, is that the goal? Is that what we're trying to do? Are we trying to get more cars to drive into downtown and park? Is that our goal?
our goal to find the balance between, because it's not like we're saying we want no cars downtown. It's just how many and where. So like, I completely respect that Galena is probably safer with parallel parking, but I also respect the business community and others who want and are maybe not as able to get to downtown in a way without their cars. So that's why I'd be very interested in exploring finding parking elsewhere in downtown, maybe through the process of implementing one-way streets, or some other fashion to strike this balance between both things.
Okay.
And then, I don't know, yeah, that was really what I had for that, because I would be open to angle parking on Galena Street, if I felt like it was truly needed and if that was the will of the community. But like I said, I'm really looking to strike a balance and would ask for some creative exploration into the one-way streets of Aspen, which I do believe increases safety for bikers, pedestrians, and cars, and might add parking to a downtown core and make businesses and others happy to be able to get to places within downtown. So that's how I feel on the first one.
Would you add into that the parking garage? Like, if we have opportunity for increasing parking in the parking garage, would you be interested in that as well?
Are you talking about this parking garage? Is that even a possibility? I thought we were maxed out.
No, I mean, well, we have certain uses that are going on in the garage that could be eliminated that would free up some of those spots. Yes, Asset did come to us a couple years ago with a proposal to increase the actual parking area and footprint. So, I mean, there's small opportunities there, yeah.
I mean, that definitely should be a part of it. Like I said, it's all part of the balance. It's a very holistic approach I'm talking about.
Yep.
And very much to your point, it's about striking the balance between the business community, the able-bodied community, and the people that need to drive and find a place to park. Like, that is very much a thing in this town. The aesthetics, I mean, I think it's worth exploring one-way streets in this town. Premium fines and graduate fines, yeah, I do. Everything like this, I think, needs to have the mindset of making sure it's very specific to the problem it's trying to solve and not creating new problems for especially locals. But if you're someone who's breaking the rules, this is a fine for that. So that's totally okay with me. I do wonder, is there any other thing you can do other than fining? Can you tow? To Tori's point of Iceland, I remember I got a parking ticket in Greece years ago, and they took my license plate off the car until I paid it. But that's because they have tax problems there too, so they really need the money. But
What did you do? Oh
just
my
parking
gosh. Okay.
problem? Yeah. No, it's literally parked in a narrow street. But yeah, I'm just wondering, is there other things that you can do other than like cash fines? Because I mean, if you're someone driving a Range Rover in town and you had your license plate taken off because you've broken the rules 3+ times, I don't really feel sorry for you.
The one that's been very successful, sorry, Mallory, did you want to? The one that's been very successful in this town is we did this a few years ago for, and we did a graduated on the 4-hour overtime. And what you do on the end of that is you have a couple levels, and then it gets where you have to make a court appearance. That's worked very well, and we've had 0 court appearances. And, you have to balance equity with all this, and this is why we wanted to say, are you okay with us coming back with these graduated fines? Because it is pretty effective, and if you have like an end game there, what you don't want to have is the habitual people that rack up $1,000 in fines, and then it's a difficult payment for them. So if you can make these a graduate, and then there's like a cap there, then it keeps it from climbing into those, and then you start to get better behavior and better compliance. And I just talked over a parking expert, so I'll be quiet now.
You yourself are managing a parking department, so I think really quick on the towing piece, because we have thought about a couple things. So I want to talk about like what happens to habitual violators other than just drilling up the fines. So towing, as I'm sure you all know, is hard in this community. I think, we have one tow operator that still works in Roaring Fork, and we're sort of bottom of the barrel on priority because they tow for the state first, and then they'll come here. And Roaring Fork is big, so like it takes a while to tow a car. You could boot. The other problem with towing is you have to tow it somewhere, right? So, and we're a community that doesn't have much space to tow to, so that's a challenge. We could look at ways to do that, and I think one thing that we want to do in the implementation plan is if we have towing as sort of a consequence, we have a solution for how to do that and where. Booting is another option, but that means the car is stuck in the right of way. So it just it kind of like, it's counterproductive. Kind of like taking the license plate off might be, because then that car is effectively immobile unless you're really a criminal, and then you don't care that you don't have a license plate, but most people aren't that way. So on the other side with like warnings and things like that, and I think to Tori's point, if you could do something like a discount for early payment, you could do things like a lot of communities do can drives, like instead of paying a parking ticket, you bring in cans or you volunteer for an event or something, and then there's sort of this community element instead of paying the fine. That's hard in a high tourism community because a lot of your first-time violators will never be here again. So warnings and things like that for first-time violators are good ways to take care of that.
I mean, I like the court appearance one.
Or the court appearance,
No,
yeah,
I think
which is a
that
pain.
Yeah, exactly. I'm
Yeah.
just saying it should, once again, we're not talking about just like innocent people. We're talking about people who habitually
Yes.
violate the rules of the road, so.
And parking in a crosswalk, things that are pretty antisocial. frankly.
Yeah, exactly. As far as parking permits go, my thoughts on this go to, we got an email, and I think you were involved in that with the Aspen Barbershop about how they used to move their parking permit between employees. I don't know about this technology, but, it's the same logic as SkiCo when you have like 2 passes, only one of them works that day. I don't know if this technology can handle putting in like a license plate number for a specific day so that a different employee can use it, but still just one car, and it cancels out the other one, so they would get a ticket if they tried to do 2 at any given time. But that's the issue I have with the parking permits, is trying to find that balance again between the businesses that did have a system in place where maybe different employees came to a different barbershop to work or whatever, versus making sure that we're allowing like locals and tourists to be able to park and not just giving all these parking permits to businesses or whatnot, if that makes sense and answers. And then as far as pricing goes, it's very much like the second question, making sure that it's the balance between locals and tourists, and like how there's the greatest wealth and equity in the world here in Aspen, Colorado. So you can't just do parking prices for like people that drive Range Rovers, people that are also live here too are gonna park there. So I think that's honestly the most difficult one to do, and I also feel like what is the purpose of that one necessarily, since it's like, yeah, it might be a bit of an enterprise fund, but at the same time, it's more to make sure that people actually cycle parking spots and like move around rather than stay there forever.
Yeah, I think one of the questions that we wanted to get at here is right now, and I think Tori spoke to this, and the challenges with like that parking pricing is a really difficult topic. It's emotional. It is something that council will hear about regardless of how the process goes. So all of your prices are in ordinance. The dollar amounts are in ordinance. If we want to use pricing as a parking management tool, like what you were saying, like a turnover strategy, basically, like a market-based way to encourage turnover of spaces, it's hard to do that if like we can't change the dollar amounts, because if I could look at your core during peak hours, like if I was looking at the data that we had for existing conditions, you have some areas that are well above 85% during typical peak periods. So in those cases, I would say, well, your pricing's too low. If we wanted to increase it and take advantage of elasticity of demand in such a way that it results in like that 85% threshold, that means that the dial is getting cranked. Right now, in order to do that, it would be a process where we came to council and had those dollar amounts ratified, and through a first reading and second reading, et cetera, which if that's the way that you all would like to do it, we can come up with strategies where we could maybe look at some opportunities to do this in a way where council would still be ratifying that in ordinance. But this, it's sort of like what Ward was speaking about with kind of the pace of these things. Like, if I look out at your core right now, the demand is much different than it was during like peaks, X Games, or it's not that we would be looking at changing those prices all the time. It's more that we want to look holistically at, okay, what's our off-peak look like now? What does our peak season look like now? And kind of change those rates to effectuate the demand in those ways and encourage turnover. Because right now, I would frankly say that your pricing is a little bit too low based on what your demand is telling me and my team. So does that make sense?
It does, and I would be supportive of some sort of measure like that where at least city council got to ratify it and parse through it to make sure that it made sense as representatives of our constituents. And the last thing I would say about it, and I sent Pete an email about this like a couple weeks ago, is that I would love to potentially see free parking in the core the Monday after the ski season ends all the way up until Memorial Day, and then something like October 20th to November 20th every year, since I feel like that's just a tax on locals. And I think would be a nice gift in back to the locals to be able to park in the downtown and maybe increase lunch participation, other things in downtown during the off season.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a lot to that.
Yeah.
I'll start with, don't forget that if you are doing decisions based on demand, that it might go the other way. It might get cheaper. Maybe there's some areas that are underutilized that we do want the behavior of people to park in first. So whereas in Durant, some of those areas, that's probably the only places where you'd see maybe a rise. And then maybe the half that is underutilized, where you want the better behavior, where it creates better safety, maybe that's where the prices maybe fluctuate a little bit. So it's the range based on occupancy. Speaking to your point, there's some ramifications to that, right? You would have very little availability, and I'm just throwing this out. We can come back, and if council's interested in free, okay.
You can actually have this conversation. I'm sorry, but I've had this conversation so many times I can't do it again right now. Sam had an inquiry of you that he shared. Please answer him back through the email or whatever method, because that is a longer involved request.
He did tell me to bring it up at this meeting when I did email him about it.
Okay.
If
Well,
council's
at this
interested in
meeting, we are not
pursuing that, just tell me.
considering free
Okay.
parking for the off-season. That's not in this packet or discussion. I guess what I'll do is, Ward or John, do either of you want to have further discussions or more information come back to this council for free parking in the core in the off-season?
Well, I would support it for Saturday. I think we've done that in the past, is have free parking in the off-season for Saturdays. No.
John, do you want to have a discussion about free off-season parking in the core?
I've been pretty happy with the Saturday and free parking Saturday, Sunday in the core. I don't really drive that much downtown myself, so I'm biased. I'm happy with the way things are.
So I'm not interested in that full conversation, but what I hear is that there is support for more information about Saturdays. And then if you could, you can, maybe Sam has, instead of a 3-month chunk of time or 2-month chunk of time, maybe there's something else that he would be like, hey, maybe just the week after ski season ends and maybe the week before the next, something. Maybe there's some middle, because I understand your goal. I get your goal.
Yeah. I'm free on the weekend is a nice touch.
So, maybe there's some more to it. Maybe there are some days that we do it or something, so, but the overall, I don't think that there's an appetite for that. It would have some ramifications that go deep budget-wise as well as program-wise, so. Okay. Ward.
I read in the paper today there was free beer after 2:30. That was in the Daily Planet.
The paper today didn't necessarily have it all correct, so.
You can also pay to rename the Wheeler.
I believe in induced demand. I think that, just to Sam's point, if it were free parking, that would encourage more people to come to town. My overall goal, too, number one is safety. And if the Aspen Institute forum, safety was the number one thing, and it's still number one for me. I think that making the town pedestrian and bicycle friendly, invitational, and safe is paramount in my mind. I know a lot of things about the Living Lab didn't pan out, and I don't want to go back there, but the number one incentive for that was safety and pedestrian and bicycle safety. So the first question, first bullet, no, I don't think so. I think that increasing parking supply encourages more people to drive, so, and it makes it less safe for bicyclists, so no. Do you agree with premium fines? The question is how many people actually paid their fines? I've read that it gets into thousands of dollars and they don't pay their fines, and at some point you've got to come to court. So I think, P, you mentioned that if you have and Sam was supportive of going to court after so many fines. I think that so many violations that haven't been paid. And I like Tori's idea of, pay for it in the first 24, 48 hours and get a discount, something to, but even though if you pay for it in your first 24 hours, it still counts against the number of times that you get parking, and that, on the third or fourth time, you've got to come to court, so that you don't wind up with people with 100 parking violation tickets that they haven't paid for. So, and it also gets to me with a question of equity. If you have people that don't pay the fines, and, a $100 fine doesn't mean that much to them, then it impacts the people where increased fine is more of a burden. So there's an equity question there. I think I would support the court appearances and exploring discounts to pay early. Parking permits. Well, I think that there are a lot of. It's ironic that people, business owners in the core, are complaining that there's not enough parking, yet they take a parking space in front of their place, or two spaces. So the irony there isn't lost on me. I think that there are abuses of the commercial parking permits and designed to be loading, unloading, doing things. That's fine, and I think that should be maintained. But for all-day parking for commercial uses, I think that decreases the amount of spaces that are available, and is counterproductive to what the goal of the business community is asking for, is the availability of parking so you can come in and purchase. So there, and also the parking permits for the lodges. I think that, you have off-street parking demand or requirements, and I think that you have places that are using their enclosed parking for storage and using a permit for their guests to stay on the street. I think that's counter to what we want, I think, and it's so I definitely want to. In the EV, we used to have, I think, hybrid parking for free, and then it was just EV for free. I encourage EVs, and but it might be time to look at removing special privileges for EVs in the core. So the parking permit thing I think has really been abused and counterproductive to making 15% of your spaces available. And as far as parking pricing, I again, aiming at 15% free and increasing the parking rates in the core during certain times of the day, that's still the I wonder how many people actually know that you're paying more at 12 or 1 than you would be in the afternoon. So I don't know how much of a detriment or how much of discouragement that is. I think more people are more in line with, oh, there's a parking spot, and they'll grab the spot, and they don't really care if it's going to cost them an extra $2 or $4. So I don't know about if there can be actual demonstration that increasing parking during parts of the day free up parking space, and I think Pete has indicated that in the past that has been successful. I would support being able to, in a low demand area, decrease, or where there's the parking isn't being utilized, drop the pricing, perhaps give flexibility there. And again, I'm not a real advocate of the city council micromanaging a lot of these things.
Thank you, Ward. So I think a couple things that I wanted to just offer. This planning process is really interesting because you're dealing with the two sides of the TDM coin at the same time. I think the city has done a lot of transportation planning work and has done a lot of kind of advanced things on the parking side, but not really a robust planning effort on parking. So this is the first plan that looks at both. I will say that the data does show that parking management is really the biggest kind of bang for your buck in TDM. The carrots and the support system, that helps a lot. But parking management really makes a significant dent. In terms of just percentage of folks who do choose to drive, the biggest reductions are found with two things. One is parking availability. So in cases where you kind of limit your parking inventory, that has a significant reductive effect on driving and parking. And then parking pricing is the other one. Of course, we do have the added challenge of, this is a high wealth community, and some people will make the choice that they'll make regardless of how much you crank the dial. But even in communities of means, there is still demand elasticity. It's less, it's maybe half of what it is in, average means communities, but it still is impactful. So I think when we start talking about freeing up parking, what I would say is we can certainly look at ways to respond to demand. So one way with this pricing strategy is if we see an area where demand is quite low, that does mean the price is too high, and we could look at ways to leverage that inventory so we can use it better. What I would caution against, if TDM is a goal, is going too far in the direction of kind of free parking or freeing up the parking quite a bit. One conversation that we had with the community, especially in community open houses, and it always comes up, is like, why don't you just build a parking structure? And I think that that's something that even this community, where everyone is so attuned with TDM and sustainability and emissions reduction, it still comes up, and I understand why. But I do think that, induced demand is real. It's been validated by numerous peer-reviewed studies. And so we want to caution against those things. And so limiting parking inventory and limiting parking pricing, if that's the direction that's the city wants to go, those are the biggest kind of bang for your buck strategies on the TDM side. Awesome. So
Okay, I'm going to go through and just make sure.
Yes.
Galena Street, you're not interested in increasing inventory at this time. You'll do that, or you'll have those safety discussions at another time. I got 3 out of 4 that were okay looking at graduated fines and giving you some options that might work, and we heard different details. Parking permits, that was pretty supported to come back with different options of what that could look like. And then the last one was a 3 of 4. We're okay at looking at a process that's kind of looking, we already do demand pricing in the city already. It's just maybe revamping it a little bit, and really the goal in that is TDM and then human behavior to kind of help with the safety piece. So those are the pieces we'll bring back if you're okay with that, and we'll have all the detail with that. Is that correct, Tori?
That sounds right.
Okay,
I think I was the 1 out of 4 on a couple of those, but yeah, it still sounds right.
I'll get you there.
Did I have one other question for you. Oh, I was just going to make a statement about the fact that, yes, we do have somewhat of an affluent community and wealthy visitors and the like, but everybody uses parking, so I think we have to be careful about levying our fines and pricing, just catering out of the fear that, yes, people can afford whatever, because it's not everybody. There are a lot of people that do live and work here, and they do use parking, and we do hear from them about, are you kidding me? But
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and that's something that really came out of the process is, all we can do on the TDM side is like crank the dial if we want to disincentivize. And the community, what we heard was, this is already a really challenging community in a lot of ways to live in and work in, because things are expensive, and things are expensive everywhere. But here, if I go and get a coffee, it's $10, and those types of things. And that's because rent is high, and everything adds to that. So I completely agree. I think we need to be really thoughtful about this. And the other thing is, we don't need, we're already recovering costs really well with our parking revenue. We don't need this to be a crank the dial for a revenue generation strategy.
We're lucky in that sense,
yes.
that that's not driving the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So we will not go in that direction. Really, what we want to do with pricing is, can we use it as a management tool so that we can use this inventory more effectively? And for those folks who have challenges meeting, the parking rates, are there other options? Are there cheaper places to park? We don't want to just completely leave those folks out in the cold and just cater to people who can afford whatever price.
Right.
Yeah. Point
Do you
well
have another
taken.
comment?
Thank you.
Just a question of, so is it you or some other team that's coming back on April 15th? And I was just wondering,
That's
this
me.
was, what?
The bridge?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's me.
But it's also the holistic approach, like, right, from like the Brush Creek lot into Aspen, because like this all interrelates to the bridge and all those aspects as well, right? Okay, so you will be coming back about that?
Well, you get 2 weeks off.
No, I realize that, but I just wanted to,
Yes, the other side of the conversation is
Yes.
coming, yes.
yes.
You are right.
Induce demand and everything there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the feeder.
No, I mean, exactly, they're coming
Feeder
from
line,
somewhere
right,
and
that's
they'll tell us about it, so,
Yes.
yeah.
Thank you so much. Do you have any other clarifications that you need from us?
We can really.
I'm going to end on a positive. Like, we're doing a lot better on our collections than we have in the past.
Yeah, right on. It would have been hard to go the other way, Pete, but nonetheless, I think all of us are acknowledging that you've done a really great job over the last couple of years. I will say that this is a difficult issue because of the passion that runs around it. As I always say, this is one of the few issues that kind of touches everybody, just like the speed limit sign. So many people have issues with speed limits because that's the thing that they see every day as a controller in their lives. This is similar to that. It is also what you heard the word used up here several times was balance. We are very interested in a balance solution set here. And in our community, that comes with some nuanced massaging. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank
We'll
you
see
all
you
for your
again.
time. Much appreciated.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, staff members that were here for our agenda items. The next agenda item is just for us, guys. It's boards and commissions updates. So anybody, let me start with one, because then I got to look up my other ones, if you don't mind. Real quickly, I just wanted to let you guys know I participated in the Colorado Association of Ski Towns Housing Task Force meeting today. We went over a couple of different things like House Bill 1107, which is a judicial review of local land use decisions. And more details of that if you want right here on this one sheet. Let me start it down there so you can just breeze it with Sam. You'll see exactly what it's about. 1107. Then we went on to talk about the working groups that we have formed are talking about things like real estate transfer fees. Now, we have a real estate transfer tax that, we talk about here, so we're all aware of the situation with ours. So this is really an issue for those that don't already have a real estate transfer tax in place. So our voice in this is a little bit less, although what they would want from Aspen is really just to utilize some of the information that we've had regarding real estate transfer tax and its relationship to our housing success and such. The next item was a vacancy tax, right? This is the idea that people that are not in or utilizing their homes would actually maybe come up with some sort of fee way to mitigate for the fact that it's not being utilized for housing in our community. I'm not sure that we necessarily in Aspen have the current understanding or consensus around something like that. So we are not really a heavy participant in that discussion, but this group is. And then we were talking about some landlord-tenant issues and some different bills that were coming through. Bill 1249, which was about rent increases through natural disaster, and number 1213, which was about ADA and certain relations between landlords and tenants there. The last one, I believe, was House Bill 24174, which is about sustainable, affordable housing assistance. Not a whole bunch of information at this time, but it is going into committee. It is, again, referencing assistance for affordable housing in communities working towards sustainable communities. And that was the Housing Task Force today. Does anybody else have a board report that they would like to do while I look up my other ones?
Just a question, Tori. I've attended a couple of those meetings, and is there still an indication that the real estate transfer fee would be vetoed by the governor?
No, I don't think that we got that messaging. The governor was actually at the CML meeting that was last week or 2 weeks ago. And that was not the one that he was completely opposed to. He did not express that at that time.
Okay. Is Carbondale still going down the line of real estate transfer fee?
I don't know. I didn't hear from them in this meeting.
Okay, all right. And I thought there was a general trend towards better protection for tenants and the tenant-landlord relation.
The general trend,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, if I could go into APSHA briefly, there was concern expressed by Councilman Guth about removing our hearing officer, and I'd like to know what the rest of the council feels about pursuing that at the APSHA level.
Sam, your input?
Yeah, I'll go first. I like Mick. He's a great guy, but I do think he's been around the block and probably is one of the most biased people in Aspen, or even people I've ever met, and I like him. I don't really necessarily think it's an appropriate position for him to be the hearing officer of APSHA, whether I like the guy or not, just because I do not believe he is impartial by any means of the word.
John? And you're an alternate on the APSHA board.
Yeah, so I can speak freely, right?
Looking at our council, is there any limitations on this discussion?
I'm just looking for general directions from a council for.
I don't think there's a limitation. I mean, they're seeking direction on something that would eventually be discussed in public at APSHA. I don't think it's subject to executive sessions.
Great.
He's an appointed official.
Okay.
And, you know, if they're reviewing it publicly, then they can seek direction from council.
My feelings on Mick Garland hearing officer, yes, there have been some instances recently where his judgment has been questioned, but as the alternate member of APSHA, I've been privy to the conversation.
I would caution not to disclose anything that you may have heard in an executive session. That was
Okay, fair enough.
the point I think that Tori was really raising. But the discussion that can be had in public is just in perhaps response to like Sam's comments.
I'm happy with his performance as a hearing officer. I think he's done a good job.
My input would be that I don't know enough about any of the rulings that he has done to really accurately assess how that behavior was. I have not looked into those. I do agree that Mick has a lot of history, and so is there a concern that some of his history may get in the way of his rulings? I would leave that to to APSHA and those that have looked into those proceedings or even participated to have more color on that. I just don't know.
I will share this, and this is public record, is that in a couple of appeals anyway, the question of Mr. Ireland's bias was raised as an issue, and the courts, I think, ruled that the fact that he has been expressing an opinion in the papers and has been very much in favor of workforce housing does not an indication or proof of bias in his rulings.
I would say maybe from a legal standpoint, but sure.
I didn't look any deeper into, some of the things that have gone on. If there was, if you wanted to have a longer conversation about that, maybe share some of that stuff, but I just don't know any more about it.
I mean, it's also, not gonna lie, uncomfortable for us to talk about because he could write about any of us in the paper on any given week because all he does is write about the city council generally or politics.
I have no
We're
problems
cannon
with-
fodder anyway,
No
Sam.
problems with Mick writing a column about our council.
No, but that's probably because you agree with him more than not. That's all I mean. So, or I don't know. Sorry, I don't mean
Nothing
like
to
that.
hide
But
is
just
all
like
I'm saying.
It can be, what you're saying is it can be uncomfortable for us to engage in this conversation because of the possibilities, but you're absolutely right. Hey, it's a small town in every direction, so whether he was a columnist or not, we are oftentimes written about, even if it's a letter to the editor, so yeah.
yeah, no kidding. So.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for checking in on that. I'll jump in real quickly. I gave a brief update at our last meeting, but I just want to reiterate, the Aspen Chamber meets on the last Tuesday of every month. This last one was presentations around Aspen Police Department Public Safety and Pickens County Sheriff's Public Safety as well. I guess most notable during that conversation was a brief discussion around some of the transient or unhoused population that we see downtown and how they're handling that. We kind of got that update in our joint meeting with BOCC. So if you have any further questions, I don't really have any more information around it. They didn't share anything further from that meeting. They were really focused on crimes, whether it be violent crime or else. There's a feeling that basically where we are as a community is an extremely safe community with good law enforcement response. For them, they are looking at opportunities that involve technology and evolving methods of policing that still stay within our community policing, ethic and value that's been here for a long time. Again, the APD was there and the Pickens County Sheriff's Office. That was the bulk of the ACRA meeting that I last attended. John, do you have something?
Yeah, I had an actually special action meeting earlier today, because we have some issues with conservation easements in one of our neighborhoods.
Hampshire and Nordic.
Yep.
Nordic.
Oh, I'm sorry, Nordic, did I say Hampshire? Nordic Council. So anyway, that's a pretty brief meeting, but we had to craft a response to this particular HOA, and it's a little sensitive. But I'm hoping for a good outcome.
Just want to mention, so I'm just saying this very matter of fact. I sent you all an email on February 28th saying I'm open to joining more boards and commissions. I only heard back from John, but that was after like a weekend thing, but I haven't necessarily heard any boards or commission you guys were willing or wanting to give up. Please just let me know in due time if you do want to pass along any boards and commissions.
I will address that a little bit. I've been thinking about that. The problem is, I've realized that I've been serving on these boards and commissions now for a year, and I've invested some time, I've made relationships with these people, and frankly, it's not that hard to go to one meeting a month. So currently, I'm not sure if I really need to give up any boards.
That's perfectly fine if you don't want to.
My comment, I guess I never got back to you, but there were two memberships that we chose, that were chosen to be members. One of them was Club 20 and the other was I-70 Corridor. And I don't know that we have representation on either of those. And I was curious if you would be interested in pursuing either of those.
If needed, send me the information, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, well, there is a Club 20 meeting later this week, no, the 13th and 14th of April. So that'd be a great start. I'll circle back with you around sending you information around Club 20 and the I-70 Coalition, which right now I do the communications for I-70 Coalition, and I'm happy to get you involved in that. The commitment's not that great and stuff, but our seat at the table is worth it.
Yeah.
According to us, so.
I don't need anything. I got plenty going on. I got the fire department. I got the 9th Judicial District. I'm involved in 1,000 different things. I'm just willing to help out if needed. I don't need to just add things to my plate just 'cause. It's fine. I'm just letting you guys know, especially because of the way I felt coming on the council. It felt like, honest to God, hazing versus trying to get on these boards and commissions. So I'm just telling you my personal sensitivities to it, and I'm here and I'm willing if you got anything for me.
Okay, your hazing versus your desire to actually serve on any extracurricular boards. I don't know what that's about, but I will get back to you about I-70 Coalition and Club 20. As for my other boards that I serve on, some of them are requested that the mayor is the seat, and the other ones, like CAST, is something that I do want to participate in, and ACRA and the Board of Health are all things that I'm very passionate about and want to make sure that I continue to be involved there. So I don't really have the opportunity to give many over. But I'll give you information on those other two for sure. Thank you for bringing that up.
And APSHA is one that I'm supremely interested in and don't want to give that up. Now, has CoA, are they changing their bylaws?
Good questions.
That they're not, and did you resign from CoA as an alternate?
I did reach out to him just like a week or two ago to say I will stay involved, but not in any official capacity because of the changes you're making there.
And did they make a change in their bylaws that say that elected officials, or what is the status of that?
They're not forbidden.
In the
but-
midst of transitioning.
Yeah.
Electeds are still part of the board. I'm still part of the board. And it's going to be months before it transitions to the donor model that we're shooting for.
But there was a bylaw change that electeds were going to be off the board?
I don't believe the bylaws have been changed yet. I think it's being worked on right now.
It is being worked on, but yeah, because of the financial model that they're changing to, they don't necessarily want elected officials on. They want people that can raise money for the board.
Yeah, I understand that, and my involvement with CoA over a period of about 6 years, in REMP funding, I'm familiar with that, and if you're no longer serving as the alternate, I'll step in and do that, to go to the CoA meetings and get up to speed on what they're doing now.
Yeah, because I expect to be on the board until the end of the summer.
Okay.
Then I wanted to just check back in with you guys about the RAFTA meeting that was held. As I said at one meeting, we had an emergency meeting of RAFTA board, and actually Sam attended. I tried, but I couldn't get in because they went into executive session, and I was having some issues that I couldn't even get in. So Sam was there for that one, but that was a special meeting for an executive session. Then we had our regularly scheduled meeting, which is on the second Thursday of every month. And the biggest issues that we talk about at RAFTA are succession planning. We have Dan Blankenship, who's going to be retiring this year, and we have named a new incoming CEO to take over September 1st. That really dominated our conversation. We're early in the year, obviously, so we're not really making many moves around things that weren't kind of approved and looked at last year. Strategic planning discussion. We had more information about our housing and our housing goals come back to us. A couple of supplemental appropriations, but again, the meat of the conversation is around succession planning. One thing that I do constantly report on when I come out of RAFTA meetings to you guys is about our employment levels. If I'm not mistaken, the report that I heard was that we are actually healthy in that area. They like to have excess staff, so when we talk about 107% of staffing, that means that we are not only 100% staff, but we feel that we can even move with the fluctuations that are bound to come our way. We have the season ending here, so we're going to see some of those staffing numbers go down. But as we look to the summer, we feel pretty confident that we've got a good hold on staffing going into summer and the summer needs.
And I'm on RAFTA alerts for BRT.
Uh-huh.
And every day, there's some inbound or outbound times that have been canceled. And is that because of drivers? Is that demand? What is?
It is not demand. I would say it is for drivers. I'd be interested to see. I can put an inquiry in to get a little bit more detail around why that's a daily occurrence.
Yeah, I used it a lot a year ago, and every day I get notices. And so if we're at 107%, do we need operationally to move drivers to where there's high demand on BRT?
Okay, I'll find out. And that's all for RAFTA, that's all for CAST, and that's all for ACRA at this time.
That's all, folks.
That is all. With that, I guess that it kind of concludes our agenda for this evening. We want to say always thank you to GrassRoots, and this time I can say that we will not be back next week. We have a week off with various assignments that all of us are doing. We will be back on the 15th with a work session and the 16th with a regularly scheduled meeting. Thank you, guys. Have a wonderful start to your April. Happy April.